Hi, Jess.
Hey Matt, good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
I am doing very well. Really excited about this episode. I think it's special to both of us. So,
It is. Yes, this is one that I'll be honest, when we started all this, I didn't know if we were going to have this episode as quickly as we are, which is, first off, an amazing thing, number one. Number two, this is a very near and dear episode to our hearts as well, just because of who our wonderful special guest is today. Now, before I introduce this individual, I just want to make a note that thus far, everyone who's kind of been with us listening to Cyber on the Edge, listening to the different journeys of the founders and the CISOs that we've interviewed, thank you so much for coming on this with us. Some of the conversations that Jessica and I have been having with some of our guests have been really impactful conversations. And the messages, the DMs, the in person discussions, which I didn't expect to get here in North Texas, but had someone actually kind of stop me and be like, hey, I recognize you. And I just want to say that one, yeah, I won't name who, but there was one guest that we had in our first two episodes. I'll leave it at that. This individual actually gave me some really good advice to a question I didn't know I had. And it was really cool to see that. So, just a huge thanks to our listeners. And we're really happy to bring this episode to you today in kind of retrospect to all of that. With that being said, I'm not going to continue to refer to our guest as the guest. Instead, we're going to bring him up on stage. Max, are you with us?
Yeah, right.
There he is. Max, welcome to Cyber on the Edge.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really, really happy to have the chat with you guys.
awesome. Yeah, thanks Matt. This is really exciting. So I guess to kick things off, tell us about LimaCharlie. What do you guys do?
So kind of put very simply, LimaCharlie is just taking a new approach to a lot of things at the same time in cybersecurity. So the way that we do things is that we're really kind of like a cloud provider. You can look at it as us as an AWS type thing. So, hey, all of the products, all the things that we do are going to be self-serve and multi-tenant and build per usage and API first, OEM for all the things around a cloud provider. And then the actual product behind it, which is kind of the second important part, is cybersecurity core capabilities, right? Sometimes we talk about them as primitives because we kind of use using the same wording as an AWS. They use the word primitive, but it's the idea of saying we're taking technologies that are really well understood at this point, and our EC2 was the EDR, and let's just take those core capabilities and put them in that cloud provider environment where they can all work together out of the box, and they can work together in a way that kind of works for our users, right? It's not the way that we're prescribing this is the only way things work, but like a cloud provider, you just kind of like put the Lego blocks together and do cool stuff. So that's it in a nutshell.
I like it. AWS and Lego blocks all in one place. I
Yeah.
like the I like the description there. Just a quick note for everyone who's listening to this. Jessica, Max, and myself have known each other for a little while, so you're going to hear us as we go through our conversation here. Certainly refer to some things as a kind of like seeing it through a different lens, maybe because today we're here to understand Max's journey, but we're also are very close to the LimaCharlie message as well. But Max, I want to take a step back with you because an idea like LimaCharlie doesn't just happen one day. We don't just kind of wake up and say, you know what, I think I'm going to go just try to build something different today, right? There's got to be a journey that gets there. There's got to be a journey that leads you towards making this happen. I want to understand a little bit more about that. So, what made you decide to start LimaCharlie? I'm assuming it's a lot of background and things built up into it, but why LimaCharlie? Why are we here talking about this today?
Yeah, it's there's a journey, and I would add that it's also a bit of a grayscale in the sense that when can you tell, like, oh, you've arrived at that vision, and
Mm.
that's the one starting point. Like, it's never really the case. um so my background, right? Very I'll be kind of brief, but I'll try to, I think, call out.
We want to hear as much as you've got.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds
So
good.
let's start. Max was born
on a cold morning. So I think the first, like the first part is, as you can hear with my accent, I'm Canadian. I'm Quebecer. So French is my first language. So forgive me if I every now and then kind of get like a weird pronunciation of something. Um, but yeah, so I'll kind of start by saying I was always really interested in computers. For me, we always had a computer at home since I was like a baby. I think it's like literally, I think for my whole life. And so I always had some interest behind it. And, we're talking, we're talking kind of like late 80s, early 90s. Computers were a different thing than they are now. So there's kind of a lot around learning the hard way of how to do things with the computer, and how it worked. And I'd say cybersecurity kind of existed. I don't know if we really called it even cybersecurity back then, right? Like it was more, let's be honest, right? It was like the hacker kind of, hacker culture, but I would say as viewed through a really thick prism of Hollywood, initially, right? Which is not really
very
exactly it.
undergroundy, like secret warehouses and stuff like that.
Guys in the basement.
Exactly.
Yep.
And touching, I think it had some like weird overlap with a bunch of things at the same time, with like spooks, like in intelligence, and like a little bit around crime and like all these weird things.
Yeah.
So that was my only exposure, in the sense that like love computers, didn't really know about like anything security. Eventually went to do my bachelor's at UVic in Canada. That's University of Victoria, and in computer science. And that's when I really started programming, which was really like the first kind of big step in my opinion towards cybersecurity. But again, it was as not as a cybersecurity thing, but like computer science. Did a few work terms. So it was a co-op program. So I got the opportunity to go in different companies and essentially do internships. So I think my degree had like 5 of them, 4 or 5, I want to say. And the early ones were fine. But I think through life you learn about yourself, and it sounds like a super big cliche, right? But I really do believe it. It's only in hindsight that you see the pattern. And for me, the big pattern that will be very highly recurring throughout my career is, if I'm not particularly intellectually not involved, but like hooked into something, or like really interested, I do very badly. And so like high school wasn't really my thing. I think only towards the end of high school you kind of got into like interesting topics,
because you can see the finish line.
Okay. Yeah. Certainly there's that aspect, but I think there's also like getting into physics. Right? Like I had a physics class in high school, and all of a sudden it wasn't just, what's your multiplication table? Why? Well, because you need to learn them. Why? Because you have to learn them. But it was, hey, these are rules that are behind the world. And if you can understand the rules, you can start, predicting things. It was just super interesting to me. So all this to say, early like internships were okay. It was interesting. I enjoyed programming, but the whole time, over time, I was really kind of intrigued by cybersecurity. But again, at the time, cybersecurity wasn't a degree. It was still very underground, and so I wasn't really sure how to kind of go to that. now I was really what I would say was the really first big like pivot point for me was the last place where I did internships was the CSC, the Communication Security Establishment in Canada. For those that don't know, which should probably be vast majority of people, it's the NSA in Canada. So it's part of the Five Eyes intelligence community, right? UK, Canada, US, Australia, and New Zealand. So I got the ability to go and do an internship there. And my first internship was pretty unremarkable. I was going into, think about it this way, right? You're going to go and work at the NSA. Mm-hmm. Like, what are you going to be doing? This is going to be exciting, right? You need to get, and you need to get, top secret clearance to go and work there. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be cool. And I ended up being an intern building, amongst a few other things, the web app that managed parking assignment for the organization.
Of course,
exactly what you're thinking.
It was right above serving in the cafeteria, where
I wouldn't quite put it that way. And look, it's fine to do that, but if you look at it from the perspective of I'm in university. I'm waiting to go to this place that's doing all these cool, amazing things. I want to do security. And then that's where you end up. It was not engaging, right? So had difficulty, but kind of moved through it. And really, I was able to see from within the organization, here's the groups that do the thing that is kind of interesting to go and do. And so I did the what is now like the boomer cliche of, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to the person responsible for hiring the next internship in that group. And like every week, just hammer them. And so I did it. And again, I get it. It doesn't always work out like that. But for me, it did work out, as in after one or two semesters, they came back to me and they said, we had somebody that was slotted in for like the next semester, but they dropped out for whatever reason. Are you interested? So
nice.
Yes.
Perfect timing.
Exactly.
Very good.
So I came back, did my internship there. And I think that was the moment where, and by moment, I really mean kind of, semester, where I learned a ton about what drives me personally. So I joined that group, and obviously, usual disclaimer, like can't say the details of what I did.
All right. Well, episode's over then. Never mind. That's
yeah, that's right. Your Russian handlers will be disappointed. So what they did is they got me in the door and they said, okay, first day, your work for this semester will be on like this product. So there, here's a piece of software, very well-known piece of software. That's your project. I was like, okay, what does that mean? Like, what do you want me to do? And they're like, nah, this is kind of working as intended. Figure out whatever there is figuring it out about it. See what you can learn about it, how it works, what you can do with it. Just go. So that was, kind of like the definition of like greenfield. The other aspect they said is, whatever you end up doing for us this semester around this thing, know that we will never use it ever, ever, ever. So I was like, okay, you don't often hear that. Yeah. But then the logic made total sense, right? From their perspective, they're saying, this isn't about you producing something that's going to be, production grade, because we know you can't get there. This is about us seeing what you can do in a bubble, right? Without the assistance of kind of, the organization as a whole. Like, what can you do, right? Where do you go in that project? So this was a winter in Ottawa in Canada, and if you've ever
Yikes!
been,
I've heard.
yeah,
I've
that
I've
is,
heard about. Let me put it this way: I've seen some footage from some Senators games, and outside the arena or whatever, it looks like a tundra out there.
yeah, it's the combo of the trifecta of it's really cold, there's lots of snow, and it's dark vast majority of the well. Don't get me, it's not like Alaska, like Arctic Circle, but it's enough that if you're doing like 8 to 5, 8 to 6, whatever it is, you're really just barely seeing the sun every day, like barely. So so you kind of put this whole kind of environment together, and they said, like, here's a laptop, like a loaner laptop. Technically, because you're doing whatever you're doing in a bubble, this is technically unclassified, because like you could literally just be doing whatever whatever you want at home. So just like do whatever you want with that. So it meant that I started working and really, really quickly got into this kind of habit of a very unhealthy habit, but you're 20 something year old, like going to work in the morning, working all day, going back home, like eating a bit, and then going on the laptop and like keeping working all night, because I was discovering everything was to be discovered for me at that stage.
Right.
I was coming from a computer science, computer science is here's how computers should work and how to make them do the things you want them to do. Security is here's how things actually work, and how what people think they're making the computer do is really, really, really different than when it's actually done.
Yes, a good number of threat actors have figured that little trick out very nicely.
That's right. That's right. And so I think it was, like, for me, it was super interesting getting that difference in perspective of what's programming, and then looking under the hood. And I'm going to use some now, probably, I don't know if those tools are still used as much as they used to be, but like Ollie debug,
Yeah,
and IDA Pro.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So IDA Pro is a disassembler, right? So to take like computer code, disassemble it into assembly instructions, doing reverse engineering of software. And the other Ollie debug is it's not the same, but it allows you to go and look at the assembler at runtime as things are.
Yeah.
Anyway,
our malware.
I know this is not
our malware analyst listeners just got a huge like perk up of wait a second. What? That's yep. This is some good software there, Max.
So it was this discovery of it was the discovery that fundamentally, it's going to sound stupid, but that fundamentally there's no magic at all in a computer. And what I mean by that is, sometimes if you're coming at it from a software writer perspective, you create software and you expect that this is exactly what the computer is doing. It's going to goes through those steps. But I'm asking it to read a file. How it reads that file, that's kind of opaque to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the other, like, peeking behind the curtain and seeing, oh, everything that the computer does is very well defined, and I can look at it, and I can modify every single part of it, especially Windows, especially back in the day. Very, very little protection. So, if you wanted to mess with the program, there's nothing stopping you from doing anything on a computer back in the day, right? You could do everything. So it was super eye opening, super engaging. So just went all in. And I think after, I forget if I did I think I did one semester with them. And at the end, I had an offer for full-time employment, assuming that I could assuming that I graduated,
Okay.
which was always it made sense. It was also one hell of a motivator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bet.
So
Again, you
went
could see
back to school. Yeah, no, that's right. You could exactly, totally. The reward was now clearly set. It wasn't like maybe I'll find a job. It was like this is the thing I want to do. They're gonna pay me great money to go and do it. So let's just get her done. So went back to school, and again, right when you're motivated, everything changes. So I think I had 3 semesters left. I wanted to graduate in 2. So I did something really stupid, and I I took my 2 semesters, and then I took the third one, which had a lot of electives,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of packed all my electives into one semester, and then I got those from like, I don't think it was the University of Phoenix, I want to say, but like those universities where you can do remote, online universities. So I'm like, I'm going to take all these electives, do them during my the summer during one semester, and that way I can graduate early. And so I think I ended up having like a bunch of courses, and then I think over 1 or 2 weekends doing every other, like all those electives, just all the homework, all the everything at once over 2 weekends. It was I got lucky. I'll put it that way. But yeah, I graduated and then went to work for the government in intelligence, and it was for the most part really, really great. I think thinking back around kind of the big lessons for me in being at the government, really the mission was kind of the big thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the outside, it's easy to kind of think that it's not romanticized or exaggerated, but no, people that are doing these things do feel the mission, and it is there, and it's a big thing, and it's a big motivator. Mm-hmm. So I did that for many years, and so I was on the SIGINT side of the house, signals intelligence. CSC is dual mandate, so offensive, defensive, essentially. And did a ton of super amazing things. I was able to just explore things, right? Everything was kind of greenfield for me at that time. So I think for me, that was by far the critical catalyst for me to get into cybersecurity, and to also calibrate what I could do. And I think my interpretation, again, everybody's different, right? Like my interpretation of looking back on my career is, I think everybody is as they work, as they do things, kind of calibrate what they can do, and by definition, to recalibrate to something higher level, you have to go outside of your comfort zone, and you have to take the leap. But the really cool thing about it is that when you do, and that does allow you to recalibrate, it's something you get for the rest of your life, right? It's never like, oh, I guess I should, go back to doing this little tiny thing. It's like, now I know that I could do that. So I'm just going to try to keep doing that. So eventually, after a few years, went on the defensive side of the house. Again, mission, but super different kind of set of things, working with a lot of departments, and all that cool stuff. And then I got to the point where I felt like I'd done a lot of things that were really interesting within, but I wanted to do more. And that is sort of like the biggest other trend for me throughout my career, is I've kind of always wanted to do more than I could do wherever I was, which is a blessing and a curse. So back in the day, I was like, I'm going to go and do outside training for reverse engineering.
Okay.
and because that was the thing that I really enjoyed, I was good at, I was pretty specialized. I was like, I'm going to make a course. So started building that course. Obviously, like the elephant in the room is, well, it can't be classified. Like, you got to be really, really, really careful. So built the curriculum. Everything in my curriculum was backed by references and links, on Google of like, nope, this person's talking about that technique. Like all of it is unclassified. And then I had to get that cleared. And then that's when I hit the brick wall of government, which at the time was way more solid than it is today. I think things have changed quite a bit, but at the time, a lot of the mentality in intelligence was rightfully so from a historic perspective. Whatever you do in here, by definition, you could never do anywhere else. Like it's impossible for you to do this outside and for it to not be classified. And if you think about it in terms of, I intercept like, RF radio between, like I don't know, an embassy somewhere in the world, like, yeah, how could you possibly apply that skill set outside of intelligence? But now if you're talking cybersecurity, well, it turns out that there's a lot of cybersecurity in the world, and that kind of concept doesn't hold, but at the time wasn't there. So it was just like hard deny across the board, all the things. So I got frustrated and I was like, all right, let's try to go out a little bit into the world, see what else I can do. So I went to CrowdStrike, this little startup getting started with a lot of like a cloak of secrecy around it, like CrowdStrike. So I was around, I think, employee 100 kind of thing. And it was a pretty interesting experience. So you have on one hand the government with the mission, profit never comes at any point in the equation. And then you go to a private sector company that is optimizing vastly around profit and very little else. And so it was like going 0 to 100 really fast. And it was a shock. It was a huge culture shock for me. And so I kind of, built a bunch of systems around the security operations center and like some of the intelligence stuff there. So it was interesting kind of first step. But I had a lot of trouble. I had a lot of trouble adjusting. I was coming in from the perspective of delivering the security outcome for the customer is the unique thing. Like it's the main optimization. As we'll talk some more, right? In the private sector, the reality is that it's part of that optimization, but it can't be the whole thing. Otherwise, you would just volunteer to do, the FIR, right? Yeah. Like incident response. So it was an interesting learning experience. Eventually moved on, worked. So I guess the one thing I'll call out was one of the interesting things from CrowdStrike was that it was the early days of the cloud. And they, obviously coming from intelligence, never heard about anything cloud.
Didn't trust
it. Clearly, yeah. Even open source, government is a super weird ecosystem, right? Some groups would spend millions of dollars on like this crappy little IBM product that had 20 different, amazing open source alternatives, but is weird. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but they were really, really heavily leaning around the cloud. And I kind of learned through that, that for them to use the cloud very heavily changed things. It sounds again like kind of an obvious statement, But I think it was pretty important at the time, which is they were going cloud first, and it meant that a bunch of the things that people that even worked at CrowdStrike had done in the past were pretty drastically changing in how they were delivering that and the economics behind it. Never thought about it twice at the time, but kind of looking back, obviously it's a topic that is very topical for starting LimaCharlie. So ended up leaving CrowdStrike after a while, going to Google Internal Security. Again, completely different environment. In some ways very similar to the government. I found a ton of amazing people is sort of how I would describe it. Like, to me, that was really the biggest thing. I think they're public about it, but the way that they did hiring was this. I'm sorry. Can I say a small swear word on this podcast? Or are we
Sure,
trying to?
we're
Okay,
good.
like the no assholes rule,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
Like what you've heard over time. Was a big thing, and it really translated for me in the people that were there. So a lot of great people, super bright teams that knew how to do security, did amazing, drove amazing outcomes of security for Google. And what I learned also there, which again is another crumb that kind of comes back later, was you had this amazing team of people that knew what they were doing. And yeah, it's higher caliber than that statistically the average of like maybe the industry. But as they went to go and look for some products for what they wanted to bring in and do, we did an evaluation of EDR. So a lot of my experience in the past was EDR. EDR is endpoint detection response. It's agents that look for bad things happening and allow you to respond in security. So we're looking for that. So we had kind of a survey of like, hey, let's look at the EDR space. And the really sad realization I had at the time was everybody had been driven down market in cybersecurity, meaning the products, even CrowdStrike, right? CrowdStrike early days was all about the sexiness of APTs, which was advanced persistent threat at the time. So the nation state actors, right? Fight the nation state actors. And what they found as a company over the next few years was, well, it turns out very few people are attacked by APTs. And even if they are, very few people could respond to it. And chances of detecting it is like really even harder. And even more than that, if you're trying to do that as a product, it's kind of a game over, right? The product aspect means this piece of software, standalone, it's running on a computer somewhere without any intervention by anybody else, has to be able to say like, hey, yes, this is this super rare, really, really pinpoint attack on, some piece list from some state. That turns out, I think it's wishful thinking, I would say, right? So all the companies, all the EDR companies had been driven down to types of products that could run across, that anybody could use across the whole industry. It didn't matter. You deployed it and you were kind of safe, and kind of the antivirus kind of market historically, but with a slightly different name. And so as you're Google and you're saying, we have all these amazing people, they know what they're doing. We're trying to bring something in that will allow us to go and apply that knowledge to go and deliver that outcome for Google. And all you're given are these really, really old school products that are mostly, here's like the 3 ways you can interact with it. Very, very kind of limited. Was a pretty big disappointment for me. And I think that's when it crystallized in my mind. I've had a very, very biased career because I went from, school to intelligence, to CrowdStrike to Google. Across all of those were amazing teams. And turns out that there's a lot more in the market. Like there's a lot more types of environments. And so the optimizations from those companies is very different. From there, I think another pretty important moment for me was going into hearing about a moonshot getting started in Google X. So Google X, as it's supposed to be known, is the moonshot factory of Google. Essentially, it's the experimental branch. Not the companies, the groups that are started there are kind of given a mission, which is you're going to pick, a specific area or a specific type of problem, and you're going to see if, with the means of Google, combined with a startup-like environment, right, microcosm, you can achieve moonshots, meaning things that are way beyond what
right.
anybody would have thought that you could achieve.
And also, I am assuming by design would be very difficult with large teams or traditional corporate structures.
Exactly. Right. Like I think I kind of mentioned Google was a little bit like a government in many ways, for partially great reasons.
Yeah.
It's an amazing engineering culture. So a lot of it is you have an idea about doing a thing, you make a paper for it, you communicate it over the next 6 months with 5 different teams. You get feedback from everybody. You need to get buy-in for every single other engineer. It's that type of culture, which is amazing if you're building the pyramids. If you're trying to just build a Formula One, just try to go fast, quick, not so much. So yeah, it was this idea of taking really small teams with the funding if needed and trying to do go and do big things. So all this to say, there was rumbling of a moonshot in cybersecurity that was getting started. So as soon as I heard that, I was like, that is the thing.
All these years have culminated into something, right?
Exactly. So I think, and to do that so everybody, I think every human to a certain extent is worried about risk or has some reluctance to risk. So when you're kind of putting together a pitch of a moonshot, but as part of Google X, it's kind of the best of both worlds, right? Because I'm going to still be a Google employee-ish, with the same kind of pay and security, all that stuff still there. But I also go and have the ability to go and do something amazing. So that was pretty attractive. And so I joined what at the time was called Project Lantern.
Okay.
Yeah. So very, 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 very early on, I think I was like 4th or 5th kind of thing on the project. And it was not even pre-product. It was pre-idea. So it was a super fun time because it was this idea of, hey, we've got all this backing by Google. Like, what crazy, amazing thing could we do?
Right. What can't we do?
And so we, almost, right? Like, and the whole baked into this assumption was for the next year, you're not expected to have a product built, but rather to test these ideas, right? Come up with an idea, test it with the relevant people, investigate it a little bit, and depending on how that works, then move on to the next and see kind of where you want to go. So it was from the super mundane, which there's a couple, all the way to the completely crazy stuff, which was a lot of fun. And so we spent a year kind of ideating, going through all of those, and eventually settling on the thesis that became Chronicle Security, and then spending, I think maybe it was about a year kind of building up Chronicle security to the point where we spun out of Google. So that the part of that whole life cycle for Google X is, after a certain point, you become truly your own company that Google has a stake in, but you're a startup. So yeah, I was part of that. Lot of fascinating stuff. And then when the company spun out, it was the time where kind of a time of reflection, in the sense that I had to, sign new contract with the new company. There's kind of a lot of paperwork going on around that specific event. So I thought, well, if I'm not going to go, now's the time to do it, instead of just going through that phase.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, I've always kind of outgrown, in the sense that wanting to do bigger things than where I was, like, my whole career. And it kind of felt like now's the time for me to go and start something.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, Max, sitting inside of X and launching what has become Chronicle and thinking, man, I wish I could do something a little bit bigger, is the next step is only, well, now you have to go define bigger,
Yeah, that's right.
And that led to LimaCharlie. Wow, what a
exactly. And you got to do it without a safety net. If you're swinging for the fences, you can't be pulling what's the expression, pulling your
punches.
your punches.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's now, you told us about what LimaCharlie is now. When we first started, by the way, a very, very inspiring story that got you there. One of the things that I hope that our listeners and other founders take away from this is finding common threads. We've done a handful of interviews where folks have talked about the different paths that they've taken to get where they are. And it's never, well, I was born, I had a keyboard in the crib, I was building things from the very beginning, and I knew, now I'm on company 50, and here we are, right? It's always been this was a journey for me to go through, because it took time for me to realize what I wanted to do. And to your point, stepping out into those, I'm going to do my own thing, big shoes, is a massive move, especially, and I'm going to come out and say, as someone who has observed the way a lot of government practices work, I would argue and say that coming out of a traditional government style upbringing, and I know you had some private sector experience after that, but coming out of multiple years of government sector upbringing into now I'm going to go start my own thing, it's very hard to define two spectrums of light that are more opposite than that. It's very safe to have a mission, and I say this with all due respect as one myself, as taxpayer money to keep things going, right? Revenue is it's a line item, but we're not necessarily selling to the public, right? We're providing a service, versus now let's go make some dollars, right? Let's make this work. I'm curious, all the experience and everything that you've seen over your career, what is, and it might be multiple, but what do you think is like the biggest challenge that got you to start LimaCharlie? Aside from, of course, you personally wanting something more, but what is it you saw in the industry that you were like, this can be done better?
It's the point that I made allusion to briefly when I was at Google, where I had this, or that's half the equation, that most security products were really down market, and were really targeting. So I it's a line I use kind of all the time, but the promise-based vendors, right? Meaning there's the assumption that the user may not really truly be able to evaluate, how that product does what it's doing. And so it's the promise of the vendor to the user that they're the best. So that's half the equation, that if you were in a mature cybersecurity team, you were really limited in what you could get in terms of tooling. The other half of it was that, seeing the evolution over all these years in cybersecurity, that there's a point in time when it was true that 99.9% of IT teams, before there was even such a thing as a security team, could not, truly understand, what's kind of behind the curtain in terms of a cybersecurity product. And so where it made sense. But now uh, we talk to people that can do it all the time. Now there's a very public and open community around cybersecurity that allows people to learn a ton. There's degrees. There's a ton of those signs of what I usually refer to as the maturity of the industry. But fundamentally, it just means there's more people that want more than just here's the widget that allows you to do the things in three ways. There are people that are looking for the professional tool. And if you come, and for me, it was kind of that realization of comparing that to other industries, right? In terms of that evolution of the industry. The industry it's such an infant industry. And I kind of I know the comparison breaks down in a bunch of places, but I kind of like to think about it in terms of engineering, right? We've learned to build bridges a long time ago. And over the years, what we've developed is that we can train people to understand the mathematic equation behind, what makes a bridge not fall apart. And the whole structural engineering side of things. And then over the years, now there's software to assist those people, but fundamentally it's they have to understand the logic behind it, and the software assists them. And I kind of compare that to where we are. I mean, less and less every day, but that most of the industry is essentially making software like, hey, click here to design a bridge, and you don't need to know about how any of this works. And okay, that's not a great sign of maturity when the product is just pretending to encapsulate all the things that one could possibly need to know about it. So I think it's kind of those dots together that I realized the industry is changing, it's growing up, and part of growing up means having different tools to assist people doing things.
Oh, I like that. It's a really succinct way, I think, to summarize probably what a lot of folks have felt as they've grown up through cybersecurity. So, it's very easy, and I'm going to mention one little point about this, and then I know Jessica's got our quintessential question for you, Max. But one thing I think you've pointed out, which is good for folks to realize, especially founders who maybe are looking at a second or third startup that they've been involved with, is that the landscape is not the same as it was 5-10 years ago when maybe you built your first thing. And one of the common, and I'm assuming it's every industry, but one of the common things I hear in security is, oh, well, I would never have done it that way, or I can't believe you're doing this, or I can't believe you're going that route. And I think there is a need to call out that industries mature. It's a drastic example, but I like to use the medical industry as one of them. And I won't go into it, but as someone who personally, 50 years ago, my life would have been very different had we not made advancements in an industry. Okay. There's one point in time where I probably just would have been lobotomized and been done for, and that's it. And that was the practice at the time. Right. And the industry matured. Now we're talking about life and medical, and obviously the gravity is a little bit different, but every single industry has matured, right? COVID-19 matured the restaurant industry really fast, and it changed the way that people eat and consume food. And it's not like there was no turning back. It was just an evolution that had to happen, that had to take place. And I feel like cybersecurity's gotten there. So thank you for calling that out, because I think it is a good realization for folks who are maybe like, I can't believe what this has become, all these kids doing this stuff I would have never done and whatnot. And it's like, it's not so much that everyone is doing things you would have never done, but it's that the industry, the demands, the needs, the customer needs, and everything has changed. And we are adapting to that as opposed to sitting and getting stuck in our ways. So thank you.
That's
valid point.
That's exactly it. I would I define it in sort of like two very short sentences, which is, one is, it's critical to understand why things got to where they are today. If you don't understand that, you're going to make a critical mistake. But the other one is actually from a Steve Jobs cliche. So apologies for kind of calling that out, but it's this realization that, look around you, and everything that exists was not just born like that. It didn't just appear into the world. It's somebody else that decided to do it in a specific way and built that up. Even things that you think are institutions are really just fundamentally a person building it. So you put these things together and you realize, things can be different.
I love it.
Awesome. No, Max, this has been fantastic. Love hearing your story, your journey, and kind of what brought you to LimaCharlie today. For our listeners out there who want to check out LimaCharlie, it's www.limacharlie.io. And for our last question, Max, and to wrap things up, would love to hear, we typically ask if you could give our next guest or our next founder one piece of advice, what would that be?
Look back on your career, figure out what really drove you, even if it's not what you wish drove you, and just learn to optimize your life around that thing, because who you are is who you are. And the best outcome that you can get to is by optimizing around where you are great, not about where you wish you were.
I love it. Wow, that's very that hit deep, for sure. That hit deep. So I appreciate that, Max. It's been great having you here. Thank you so much for joining Jess and I on Cyber on the Edge. It's been fantastic to hear the journey of how you got to where you are. I would also like to drop in one little note for our listeners here. This is the type of conversation where you kind of want to keep pausing and taking notes as you go through to learn about how Max took that opportunity that he had, or I'm going to say the ability to build an app for assigning parking spaces and turning it into what is now LimaCharlie. And I just want to offer one little piece of advice for everyone. Where you are right now may not be what you had imagined it was. That was Max. Now look at who we're talking to. So if anyone is living his advice, it's him. So Max, thank you so much for sharing that and for being a true personification of what it means to find what you're good at and just excel at it. Thank you so much for joining us, Max. It's been great to have you.